The morning didn't arrive all at once. It eased its way in, slowly. Soft light slid through the thin curtains, spreading across the living room floor in warm, pale shapes. Dust floated lazily in the air, catching the glow. The house was quiet. Not empty quiet, but peaceful. Ethan stood in the kitchen, barefoot, holding a ceramic mug with both hands. The coffee inside was still too hot to drink, and he didn't mind waiting. He liked this part. The pause. The calm before the world remembered it had somewhere to be. Outside, the neighborhood rested. A distant bird called once, then went silent again. Somewhere far off, a car door closed, but even that sounded gentle. Ethan took a breath. Long. Unrushed. This was his favorite time of day. He turned slightly, leaning against the counter, when he heard it. Not a bark. Not a whine. Just a soft sound. Wood brushing against something light? He froze. The sound came again. A faint shuffle. Like paws adjusting their place. Ethan tilted his head, listening. Nothing followed. For a moment, he wondered if his mind had filled in the silence with imagination. He smiled to himself, almost amused. Living alone did that sometimes. Still. Something about it lingered. He set the mug down carefully, the ceramic clicking softly against the counter. The house felt cooler without the warmth in his hands. As he walked toward the front door, the floor creaked under his step. He moved slower than usual, not wanting to disturb whatever fragile quiet existed on the other side. He reached the door and rested his hand on the handle. No scratching. No urgency. Just presence. Ethan opened the door. And there, sitting squarely on the porch, was a puppy. Small. Still. He didn't jump up when the door opened. He didn't bark or rush forward. He simply looked up, calm and steady, as if he had been waiting. Not just for someone, but for him. The puppy's fur was light beneath the dark streaks that covered it. At first glance, Ethan assumed it was mud. Thick, dried mud clung to the puppy's chest, legs, and side. But something felt off. The puppy's posture was too composed. His back straight. His paws neatly placed beneath him. One ear flopped forward slightly, giving him a soft, almost thoughtful look. Well, Ethan said quietly, more to himself than to the puppy. Good morning. The puppy blinked once. Then, slowly, he lowered his head and nudged something forward with his nose. It slid across the porch boards and came to rest near Ethan's feet. Ethan frowned and crouched down. It was a piece of cloth. Old. Soft. Folded in on itself. Hey there, Ethan murmured. His voice dropped instinctively, as if the moment required gentleness. Where did you come from? The puppy didn't answer. But he didn't look away either. Ethan reached toward the cloth, pausing halfway, watching for a reaction. The puppy remained still. Focused. His eyes followed Ethan's hand, not nervously, but attentively. Almost like he was making sure Ethan understood this mattered. Ethan picked up the cloth. It was damp at the edges, but clean in places. Not torn. Not discarded. And definitely not trash. As Ethan held it, he noticed something else. The puppy's paws were clean. Not spotless, but clean enough that they didn't match the rest of him. Ethan glanced back at the dark streaks on the puppy's fur. They weren't splattered. They weren't random. They followed lines. Natural curves along the puppy's body. Down the shoulder. Across the chest. Along the ribs. Ethan swallowed. That's strange, he whispered. The puppy's tail moved once. Just a small, slow motion. Ethan reached out and gently touched the puppy's fur. The texture stopped him. It wasn't gritty. It wasn't stiff. It was smooth, cool beneath his fingers, almost creamy in consistency. Ethan pulled his hand back slightly, then leaned in again, slower this time. The puppy didn't flinch. Ethan felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but with something softer. "This isn't mud," he said quietly. The puppy blinked again. Ethan sat down on the porch, cross-legged, bringing himself level with the puppy. Up close, he noticed the puppy's eyes weren't frantic or pleading. They were calm, trusting, as if he knew he had arrived exactly where he was supposed to be. The puppy smelled faintly of earth and soap. Ethan's brow furrowed. Soap didn't happen by accident. He looked down at the cloth again. In the light, faint markings appeared on it too. Smudges. Shapes. Similar to the ones on the puppy's fur. A slow realization began to form, not sharp, not sudden. Just a quiet sense that something here had been done on purpose. "Someone took care with you," Ethan said softly. He didn't know why he said it. He just knew it was true. The puppy leaned forward slightly, closing the distance on his own. His nose brushed Ethan's knee. Ethan smiled before he could stop himself. "Hey," he whispered. "It's okay." He glanced back inside the house. The open door. The warmth. The smell of coffee still hanging in the air. When he looked back, the puppy hadn't moved. Waiting. Ethan stood slowly. "I'm going to get you some water," he said gently. "I'll be right back." The puppy watched him step inside. Didn't follow. Didn't worry. When Ethan returned with a bowl, he set it down carefully. The puppy sniffed it once, then drank slow, polite sips. When he finished, he sat again exactly where he had been before. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, studying him. This puppy hadn't wandered here. He had arrived. Whatever marked his fur, whatever message he carried, it wasn't meant to scare anyone. It was meant to be noticed. Ethan felt something settle inside him, a quiet certainty, warm and steady. This wasn't a problem knocking at his door. It was a story. And the puppy had come to place the first page gently at his feet. What Ethan didn't yet understand was that the markings on that puppy were only the beginning, and the truth behind them would unfold slowly, softly, changing everything along the way. The puppy stayed. Not because Ethan told him to. Not because a leash held him there. He stayed because he chose to. Ethan noticed that first. The absence of hesitation. Most dogs, especially young ones, shifted their weight. Looked around. Tested the space. This puppy did none of that. He sat on the porch as if it were already familiar, like a place he had pictured before arriving. Ethan watched from the doorway, arms loosely crossed, giving the moment room to breathe. The morning light grew warmer, sliding higher along the walls. Somewhere down the street, a lawn sprinkler clicked on. Life was resuming its quiet rhythm. The puppy lifted his head slightly. Not startled. Just aware. Ethan followed his gaze. A jogger passed at the end of the block. The puppy tracked the movement calmly, then returned his attention to Ethan. Focused again. "That's interesting," Ethan murmured. He stepped back onto the porch and sat down slowly, keeping a comfortable distance. He didn't want to rush whatever this was. The puppy's ears shifted subtly at the sound of Ethan's movement, but his body stayed relaxed. "Most dogs would be exploring by now," Ethan said, half smiling. "You're not most dogs, are you?" The puppy's tail moved. One slow sweep. Ethan chuckled softly. He noticed then how the puppy's breathing was steady. Not shallow. Not fast. even after whatever journey had brought him here. That must have been a long walk, Ethan said quietly. The puppy blinked. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He studied the markings again, now that the light was stronger. They weren't smeared. They weren't accidental. The darker lines followed the shape of muscle and bone, as if someone had paid attention to where they belonged. There was care in them. Intention. Ethan reached out again, slower this time, and ran 2 fingers gently along the puppy's shoulder. The puppy didn't pull away. He exhaled. Almost like relief. Ethan felt it in his chest, a strange echo, like 2 calm breaths sinking. "You trust easy," Ethan whispered. The puppy shifted closer, closing the gap by inches. That did something to Ethan. He hadn't realized how long it had been since another living thing had moved toward him without needing anything. No expectations. No demands. Just connection. Ethan stood and went inside, returning with a small towel. He knelt beside the puppy, holding it up so the puppy could see. "Mind if I check this?" he asked gently. The puppy's eyes moved from the towel to Ethan's face. Then, a slight nod. Not literal. But enough. Ethan dabbed lightly at one of the darker streaks. Nothing came off. He pressed a bit more firmly. Still nothing. The puppy stayed still the entire time, his body loose, trusting. When Ethan paused, the puppy glanced up at him again, as if checking his expression. Ethan swallowed. "This was done on purpose," he said. He didn't know who had done it. Or why. But he knew one thing for certain. This puppy hadn't been neglected. He had been prepared. Ethan sat back on his heels, towel resting uselessly in his hands. His thoughts drifted slowly, carefully, back to the cloth the puppy had nudged toward him earlier. He reached for it and unfolded it fully. It was a small blanket. Worn thin in places. Soft from years of washing. The kind of blanket someone kept close, not because it was perfect, but because it mattered. The same dark markings ran across it. Carefully placed. Ethan ran his thumb over them. Paint. Non-toxic, by the feel of it. Faded slightly by water, but not smeared. Why would someone, he started, then stopped. The puppy stood then, not abruptly. Not nervously. He stepped closer to Ethan and placed one paw on the edge of the blanket. Claiming it. Ethan looked at him. "You want me to understand something," he said softly. The puppy held his gaze. No whining. No barking. Just quiet insistence. Ethan felt a warmth spread through him, not excitement, not urgency. Just a sense of being invited into something gentle. He folded the blanket and set it beside him. The puppy sat again, satisfied. They stayed like that for a while. The sun climbed higher. The street grew a little louder. But on the porch, time slowed. Ethan noticed how the puppy reacted to sound, not fearfully, but thoughtfully. A passing car earned a glance. A door closing nearby caused a small ear twitch. But nothing shook him. This calm didn't come from nowhere, Ethan said quietly. He stood and opened the door wider. "You can come in," he said. No pressure. No expectation. The puppy didn't move right away. He looked inside. Then back at Ethan. Then, carefully, he picked up the edge of the blanket in his mouth. Ethan's breath caught. The puppy stepped inside, placing the blanket down just past the threshold. He looked up at Ethan again, tail still. Ethan closed the door gently behind them. Inside, the light was warmer. Softer. The kind that made the world feel held together. Ethan knelt again, this time on his own living room floor. "You chose this place," he said, more to himself than to the puppy. The puppy sat. Present. Purposeful. Ethan reached out and rested his hand on the puppy's chest. The puppy leaned into it slightly, trusting the contact. Ethan felt it then. Not a question. An answer. Whatever this puppy had come to deliver. It wasn't about being rescued. It was about being understood. And Ethan realized, quietly, steadily, this calm wasn't just the puppy's nature. It was a message. A promise that whatever truth waited ahead wouldn't arrive with fear, but with warmth. And as the puppy settled onto the floor, resting his head lightly against Ethan's knee, one thing became clear. This was only the beginning. The mystery hadn't deepened yet, but it had taken its first breath. Ethan didn't rush anything. He let the puppy settle first. The blanket lay folded on the living room floor, just where the puppy had placed it. Not dragged. Not tossed. Placed. The puppy sat beside it, posture calm, eyes moving slowly around the room, taking everything in. No anxiety. No restlessness. Ethan watched from the couch, hands resting loosely on his knees. He had brought the water bowl inside, set it near the wall. The puppy glanced at it once, then looked back at Ethan. As if to say, I'm fine for now. That's usually when dogs start exploring, Ethan said softly. But you're waiting. The puppy's ears shifted slightly at the sound of his voice. That was it. Just acknowledgement. Ethan leaned back, exhaling. His first assumption that this puppy was lost felt thinner now. Most lost dogs paced. Whined. Tested every door. This one didn't even glance at the windows. Instead, his attention kept returning to the blanket. Ethan reached for it again. Up close, the fabric showed its age. The edges were frayed. The middle was smoother, worn down by years of use. It smelled clean, but familiar. Like laundry soap mixed with something personal, home. Ethan unfolded it slowly. The markings were clearer now in the indoor light. Not random stains. Handprints. Small ones. Faded, but unmistakable. Ethan froze. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The puppy stood and stepped closer, placing his paw gently on one corner of the blanket again. Not possessive. Not defensive. Guiding. Ethan swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. These aren't mud marks, he whispered. The puppy's tail gave a single, slow movement. Ethan looked back at the puppy's fur. The same pattern. Smaller handprints across his side. Along his shoulder. Carefully spaced. As if someone had made sure they didn't cover his eyes, or his nose. As if someone had been gentle. Ethan sat back on the floor. His mind shifted, not racing, not panicking. Just reordering itself. Letting go of what seemed obvious and making room for what was quietly true. This wasn't an accident, he said. The puppy sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Almost. Ethan noticed how the puppy watched his face, not his hands. Not the room. His expression. Waiting for understanding, not action. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. A memory surfaced, soft, uninvited. Paint-stained hands. A small voice laughing. A mess that meant something. He opened his eyes again. You came to show me, he said quietly. The puppy leaned in, resting lightly against Ethan's leg. That simple weight, warm, real, settled something inside him. Ethan reached out and traced one of the faded handprints on the blanket. The paint was old, but preserved. Someone had wanted it to last. Someone had known it mattered. The room felt warmer suddenly. Not physically, emotionally. Like a truth had been acknowledged, even if it wasn't fully understood yet. Ethan glanced at the clock. Time had passed without him noticing. You're not in a hurry, he said softly. The puppy didn't move. Ethan stood and went to the kitchen, returning with a small plate of food. He set it down a short distance away and sat back. The puppy looked at the food. Then at Ethan. Then, slowly, he took a few careful bites. No guarding. No urgency. When he finished, he returned to the blanket and sat again. Exactly where he had been before. Ethan smiled faintly. Purposeful, he murmured. That's the word. He sat on the floor again, this time closer. You didn't come here to stay by chance, Ethan said. And you didn't come here to be rescued. The puppy's eyes stayed on his. Ethan felt a quiet curiosity bloom, not anxious, not heavy. Just a gentle pull to understand more. What did you bring me? He asked. The puppy didn't answer. But he didn't need to. The blanket. The markings. The calm. They weren't asking for help. They were asking for presence. Ethan rested his hand on the floor beside the puppy. After a moment, the puppy placed his paw gently on top of it. A choice. Ethan nodded to himself. Whatever this was, it would unfold slowly. And for the first time since opening the door that morning, Ethan knew one thing clearly. This story wasn't about a puppy covered in something strange. It was about what happens when you stop assuming and start seeing. And as the puppy settled beside him again, breathing calm and steady, Ethan realized curiosity had replaced confusion. And that change alone had already begun to open the door to something quietly extraordinary. The afternoon moved gently. Sunlight shifted across the floor, turning warm patches into longer shadows. The house felt different now. Not fuller, but softer. Ethan sat on the floor with his back against the couch. The puppy lay nearby, not pressed close, not distant either. Just near enough to feel connected. The blanket rested between them, like a quiet bridge. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Ethan noticed how the puppy mirrored him. When Ethan leaned back, the puppy adjusted his posture. When Ethan sighed, the puppy's breathing slowed, matching the rhythm. It wasn't obedience. It was awareness. You're listening, Ethan said quietly. The puppy's ear twitched. Ethan smiled. He hadn't realized how much noise usually filled his days, not sound, but motion. Messages. Schedules. Expectations. This was different. This was stillness shared. Ethan stood and walked toward the window. The puppy followed. Not at his heels, but at his pace. Outside, a few clouds drifted lazily across the sky. A child's laughter echoed faintly from somewhere down the block. The puppy watched, calm and curious, then looked back at Ethan as if checking in. You okay? Ethan asked softly. The puppy sat. That simple gesture, waiting, felt bigger than it should have. Ethan moved to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. He filled another bowl and set it down. The puppy drank, then returned to the same spot near the blanket. Always the blanket. Ethan knelt again, this time brushing his fingers gently along the puppy's back. The puppy leaned into the touch, not demanding more, just accepting what was offered. Ethan felt warmth spread through his chest. It surprised him. He hadn't realized how guarded he'd become. How careful. Touch used to mean responsibility. Loss. Letting go. This felt like permission. Who taught you this? Ethan whispered. Who taught you to be so gentle? The puppy blinked slowly. Ethan's gaze drifted back to the markings on the puppy's fur. In this light, they looked almost golden, softened by time. They didn't feel heavy anymore. They felt remembered. Ethan sat cross-legged again and rested his palm on the blanket. The puppy immediately shifted closer, placing his chin near Ethan's knee. Not on it. Near it. Ethan's throat tightened. He reached down and scratched lightly behind the puppy's ear. The puppy closed his eyes. They stayed that way for a long moment. Time stretched, not empty, not wasted. Just open. Ethan thought about how bonds usually formed. Shared history. Big moments. Loud beginnings. This one was quieter. It was built on pauses, on attention, on choosing to stay. When Ethan finally stood, the puppy followed him into the hallway. Ethan grabbed a light leash from a drawer, not because he needed it, but because it felt respectful to offer. "Want to step outside?" he asked. The puppy looked at the leash, then at Ethan. Then he sat. Ethan nodded. "Okay." "Not yet." The puppy relaxed again. Another choice respected. Ethan laughed softly, shaking his head. "You're teaching me something, aren't you?" The puppy didn't answer. But he didn't leave. As evening approached, the house filled with softer colors. Amber light touched the walls. The puppy lay beside the couch now, his body curved slightly toward Ethan. Ethan turned on a lamp. The puppy lifted his head, then settled again. "You don't mind the quiet," Ethan said. The puppy's tail tapped the floor once. Ethan leaned back, letting the day settle into him. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he had to do anything. Fix anything. Decide anything. He just had to be here. With this small, steady presence. Ethan reached down again, resting his hand gently on the puppy's side. The puppy's breathing slowed further, deep and even. Trust. Not earned through time, but through intention. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. A thought surfaced, not a worry, not a plan. Gratitude. When he opened his eyes, the puppy was watching him. "You're not going anywhere tonight, are you?" Ethan asked softly. The puppy remained where he was. That was answer enough. As night settled outside and the room grew quiet again, Ethan realized something simple and profound. The mystery hadn't advanced today. No answers revealed. No truths uncovered. But something more important had happened. A bond had formed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But steadily. Silently. And whatever truth waited ahead, it would arrive gently. Because it had been invited in. And as the puppy rested beside him, calm and trusting, Ethan understood. Some connections don't begin with words. They begin with stillness. Morning returned quietly. Not with urgency, but with light. Ethan woke on the couch, the blanket pulled loosely over his shoulders. For a moment, he forgot why he was there. Then he felt its warmth at his feet. The puppy lay curled against the couch, head resting on his paws, eyes already open. Watching. "You're up early," Ethan whispered. The puppy's tail moved once, slow and gentle. Ethan sat up carefully so he wouldn't disturb him. Sunlight filtered through the window again, softer than yesterday, turning the room a pale gold. The house felt lived in now. Not busy, just present. Ethan stood and stretched, then walked toward the kitchen. The puppy followed, padding softly behind him. No rushing. No pulling ahead. Together. As Ethan filled the kettle, his eyes drifted back to the blanket lying neatly folded near the couch. It hadn't moved. Not an inch. "You keep an eye on that thing," Ethan said quietly. The puppy sat beside it. Ethan smiled. After breakfast, he sat on the floor again and unfolded the blanket fully. This time, he didn't rush. He studied it like a map, letting his eyes move slowly across the faded markings. They weren't random handprints after all. Some were small. Some slightly larger. Different sizes. Different pressure. Ethan traced them with his finger. "These are memories," he said softly. The puppy leaned closer. Ethan noticed faint outlines now, shapes that only appeared when the light hit just right. Letters, maybe. Or the start of them. Washed away by time, but not completely erased. Someone had tried to keep something. Ethan's chest tightened. He glanced at the puppy's fur again. The markings there matched the spacing on the blanket, like a continuation. as if the puppy himself had become part of the message. "You were meant to carry this," Ethan whispered. The puppy rested his chin near Ethan's knee. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees. Leaves whispered against one another, and for a moment, Ethan felt like the house itself was listening. Ethan reached for his phone, hesitated, then set it back down. This wasn't something to Google. This was something to feel. He noticed the puppy watching him closely, not anxious, not impatient. Just present. Waiting for Ethan to arrive at the same quiet understanding. "Whoever did this," Ethan said slowly, "they trusted you." The puppy blinked. Ethan stood and walked toward the hallway closet. He pulled out a small box he hadn't opened in years. Inside were old photos. Keepsakes. Pieces of a life he'd tucked away. He sat back down, placing the box beside the blanket. The puppy leaned in, curious but calm. Ethan picked up a photo at random. A child's hands, covered in paint. A laugh frozen mid-motion. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Then he opened them, and froze. The colors. The same shades. Faded browns. Soft grays. Earth tones. His breath caught. He laid the photo beside the blanket. The match wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to make his heart ache. The puppy watched him, ears relaxed, eyes steady. "You know," Ethan whispered. "You already know." The puppy didn't move. That was the answer. Ethan exhaled slowly, feeling something inside him loosen, not break. Just open. This wasn't about being found. It was about being remembered. He ran his hand gently over the puppy's back. The puppy leaned into it, grounding him. Ethan laughed quietly, shaking his head. "You're better at this than I am." The puppy's tail tapped the floor once. They sat like that for a long time, photos spread out, blanket open, sunlight drifting across everything. Nothing was forced. Nothing was rushed. Clues didn't arrive dramatically. They revealed themselves when Ethan was ready to notice. Finally, Ethan folded the blanket again, carefully this time, and held it against his chest for a moment. The puppy watched, calm. "I think," Ethan said softly, "this was meant to come back to me." The puppy stood and placed one paw gently on Ethan's leg. Agreement. Ethan nodded. Outside, the day continued. Cars passed. Voices carried faintly. Life moved forward. Inside, something settled. The mystery wasn't solved yet. Not completely. But the clues were no longer hiding. They were right there, in the open, waiting to be honored. And as Ethan set the blanket back down and the puppy curled beside it again, one truth became clear. Sometimes, what we're searching for has been patiently holding the answer the entire time. The afternoon sun was soft, almost golden as it filtered through the living room curtains. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor again, the blanket folded neatly beside him. The puppy rested at his side, head lightly touching his knee. They had spent hours in quiet observation, looking, noticing, understanding without words. Ethan ran his fingers gently over the markings on the puppy's fur again. Patterns, intentional, deliberate, not random. The realization came slowly. Not all at once, not as a lightning strike, but as a quiet, steady wave. He had been looking at the puppy and the blanket and the faint traces of pain in photos, but hadn't yet understood the connection fully. It wasn't just that someone had cared enough to leave marks. It was that someone had cared enough to trust. To trust the puppy, to trust him. Ethan's chest tightened. He looked down at the small animal beside him. The puppy's eyes met his, dark, calm, steady, filled with that quiet insistence. It wasn't about obedience. It was about guidance. About sharing something too important to demand, only to offer. Ethan exhaled slowly. "You've been carrying it all along, haven't you?" The puppy gave a tiny, measured tilt of the head. That was all. But it was enough. Ethan's mind began connecting the dots. The blanket, the paint marks, the careful arrangement of streaks on the puppy's fur, the slow, deliberate calm. It wasn't about being abandoned. It wasn't about getting help. It was about delivering a memory. A message. Something beautiful that needed to be returned, or recognized. His throat tightened again. Somebody trusted you, and now you're trusting me, he whispered. The puppy leaned slightly into him. Not demanding. Not clinging. Just present. Ethan felt the warmth spread through his chest. A mix of gratitude, awe, and a strange relief he hadn't realized he needed. Years of routines, of careful walls around his heart, seemed to soften in the presence of this tiny being who knew exactly what to do, and how to wait. He glanced at the blanket again, unfolded it fully this time, letting the morning light illuminate every faint mark, every handprint. He traced them slowly, almost reverently, as if touching them could let him feel the intention behind each stroke. And suddenly, it all clicked. Not with a shout. Not with a dramatic revelation. Just a quiet, absolute understanding. The puppy hadn't wandered into his life by accident. He had arrived with a purpose. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he folded the blanket again, now holding it closer to him. You've been guiding me this whole time, he said softly. The puppy rested his head lightly against Ethan's shoulder, eyes closing briefly. Ethan laughed quietly, a breathless, emotional laugh. I don't even know if I deserve this, he admitted. The puppy's tail brushed against his leg once. Steady. Reassuring. The realization settled deeper in Ethan's heart. This wasn't a story about mud, or dirt, or a lost animal. It was a story about trust. About care. About how attention and intention can speak louder than words ever could. And in that moment, he understood something else. Something he hadn't known he needed. He wasn't just witnessing this story unfold. He was part of it. Part of the memory being returned. Part of the trust being honored. Ethan exhaled slowly. A soft smile curved his lips. He let his hand rest on the puppy's back. You're amazing, he whispered. The puppy blinked up at him. Calm. Steady. Purposeful. Ethan sat there a long while, breathing with the rhythm of the puppy beside him, letting the truth sink in. The mystery had led to this quiet understanding. A bond forged not through noise, not through chaos, but through patience, awareness, and intention. And Ethan realized, finally, that the small, deliberate presence at his door had brought more than companionship. It had brought perspective. Healing. Connection. It had reminded him of something he had nearly forgotten. That some stories don't need drama to matter. Some truths arrive quietly. And change everything. Ethan leaned back, letting the afternoon light warm his face. The puppy rested his head fully against Ethan's knee, breathing calm and even. And in that warmth, Ethan knew fully, completely, that the journey was far from over, but the path ahead was gentle, guided, and filled with meaning. The emotional truth had settled, ready to bloom fully when the time came. The morning light streamed through the curtains, warm and soft. Ethan awoke slowly on the couch, feeling the small weight of the puppy curled at his side. He smiled, brushing a hand over the top of the puppy's head. Calm, trusting, familiar now. The house was still, as if it had been holding its breath for this moment. Ethan rose quietly and stretched. His gaze fell on the blanket, neatly folded on the floor. Today, he decided, he would finally look more closely not just at the markings, but at the story they carried. He knelt beside it, spreading it open on the floor. The faded handprints and tiny smudges seemed almost alive in the morning light. Some were round, soft, childlike. Others were straighter, more deliberate. A sequence, a rhythm. Ethan's heart began to beat a little faster, not with fear, but with anticipation. The puppy moved beside him, resting his chin gently near Ethan's knee. Eyes fixed. Attentive. Patient. Ethan traced one of the larger prints. He paused. Something clicked. He grabbed a notebook from the shelf and began to sketch the shapes he saw, patterns, connections, sequences. The marks weren't random. They were telling a story. A memory preserved. Slowly, piece by piece, Ethan realized the truth. This blanket hadn't just been washed, folded, or painted. It had been a message. A story passed on, carefully, intentionally, through time and touch. And the puppy. He hadn't been dirty at all. Those streaks weren't mud. They were paint. Old, faded, deliberately placed. They were a continuation of the markings on the blanket, a living bridge between the past and now. Ethan sat back, overwhelmed. His mind replayed flashes of his childhood, painted fingers, quiet afternoons with a parent long gone, laughter spilling across a sunlit kitchen. Memories he had forgotten but that had never truly left him. The puppy shifted, nudging the blanket slightly with his nose, bringing Ethan back to the present. "You did this for me," Ethan whispered, voice breaking slightly. "All this time, you've been showing me." The puppy blinked slowly. Calm. Steady. Purposeful. Ethan felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. Not sadness. Not grief. But warmth. A deep, unshakable sense of connection. He reached down and stroked the puppy's fur. The markings, paint, not mud, felt smooth beneath his fingers. Every line, every curve, carried meaning. And then Ethan understood fully. The puppy had arrived not by chance. Not randomly. He had come to restore something. A memory. A connection. A piece of the heart Ethan didn't realize he had left behind. The gentle truth washed over him. The blanket, the paint, the small living presence beside him, it wasn't a coincidence. It was a gift. A bridge between the past and present, delivered in the quietest, most patient way imaginable. Ethan laughed softly through tears. "I understand now," he whispered. "All this, it's yours, but it's mine too. You brought it to me." The puppy rested his head fully against Ethan's knee, closing his eyes. Calm. Peaceful. Complete. For the first time in decades, Ethan felt the weight of loneliness lift. Not because the puppy had come into his life, but because the meaning behind the arrival had finally been revealed. He looked down at the blanket again, feeling the story beneath his fingers. A story of care. Of patience. Of love passed quietly from one hand to another, from one heart to another, across time. The realization was gentle but profound. The puppy had guided him through it all without a single word. Ethan felt his chest expand with gratitude. A quiet, glowing happiness filled him, steady, warm, and unshakable. He whispered, almost to himself, "Thank you, for showing me what matters." The puppy lifted his head briefly, eyes meeting Ethan's. A small tap of the paw. One slow wag of the tail. That was all. A simple acknowledgement that the truth had been received. Ethan leaned back, letting the sunlight warm his face, letting the puppy rest at his side. The story had reached its heart. The gentle truth revealed not in words, not in action, but in presence, patience, and quiet intention, was more beautiful than he could have imagined. It didn't need to be shouted. It didn't need fanfare. It simply existed, and it was enough. And as the puppy rested beside him, and the morning light filled the room, Ethan knew with absolute certainty. The story, the trust, the memory, it was theirs now. Together. And that realization, quiet, warm, profound, was everything. The sun had begun its slow descent, painting the room in amber and gold. Ethan sat cross-legged on the living room floor, the blanket folded neatly beside him. The puppy rested his head lightly on Ethan's knee, breathing calm and steady. The quiet between them wasn't empty, it was full. Full of understanding, presence, and the weightless comfort of being exactly where they were meant to be. Ethan reached out and ran his fingers gently over the markings on the puppy's fur one last time. Each line, each faded streak, told a story he now fully understood. It wasn't about mud. It wasn't about mess. It was about memory, connection, trust. A soft smile curved his lips. "You brought it all back," he whispered. "You brought it here to remind me that what matters isn't lost." The puppy shifted slightly, nudging closer, and rested his head against Ethan's shoulder. No sound. No demand. Just warmth. Steadiness. Presence. Ethan exhaled, letting the tension of months, maybe years, drain away. For the first time in a long while, he felt light. Grounded. Connected. He picked up the blanket and spread it across the floor, allowing its worn texture and faint markings to fully exist in the light. Carefully, he traced a few of the patterns with his fingers, reliving the memory of hands, laughter, and care. "This was never just about you or me," he murmured. "It was about honoring the past and welcoming the present." The puppy lifted his head, eyes meeting Ethan's. It was as if he understood every word, every thought, every unspoken feeling. His small, measured gaze carried the weight of patience, intuition, and a bond deeper than words could capture. Ethan laughed softly, a warm, unrestrained sound. "I think we were both meant to find each other," he said. The puppy's tail tapped the floor once, a quiet affirmation. Ethan stood slowly, stretching, and the puppy rose with him. They moved together to the window, looking outside. The world beyond was full of motion, cars, people, sunlight, but inside, a different rhythm existed. A rhythm built from understanding, trust, and connection. Ethan picked up the small water bowl and refilled it. The puppy drank calmly, then returned to his favorite spot near the blanket. Ethan knelt down and gently stroked his back. Each movement felt ceremonial, a recognition of the journey they had shared in silence. "You've healed more than I realized," Ethan whispered. "You've reminded me what patience, care, and presence can do." The puppy's head lifted slightly, ears perked. Then he rested back against Ethan's knee. Peaceful. Full. Complete. Ethan folded the blanket carefully and placed it on the couch. A symbolic gesture, though he wasn't sure why. Perhaps to honor its journey. Perhaps to remind himself that the past could coexist with the present without pain, without fear. He leaned back against the couch, puppy at his side, and let the warmth of the fading sunlight fill him. The quiet wasn't lonely, it was restorative. For a long while, they just sat. The puppy breathing, Ethan reflecting. No urgency. No questions. Just the comfort of being fully seen and understood. Ethan's mind wandered to the journey that had brought them here, the small paw nudges, the intentional paint, the quiet guidance of a tiny, purposeful creature. He realized that every moment of curiosity, every pause, every gentle observation had been a lesson in connection. "This, all of this," he whispered softly, "is more beautiful than I ever imagined." The puppy lifted his head once more, eyes locking with Ethan's. It was a look of understanding, assurance, and quiet celebration. Ethan exhaled slowly, a smile spreading across his face. "We did it," he said. "We found it, together." Outside, the world continued. But inside, something had shifted permanently. The past and present had met. Trust had been honored. Bonds had been formed. And the warmth of shared understanding filled every corner of the room. Ethan leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. The puppy's steady breathing against him was the only sound he needed. The story of the quiet, patient story of trust, care, and gentle guidance had reached its emotional peak. No words could add more meaning. No action could improve what had already been healed. He opened his eyes. The puppy looked back, calm, composed, purposeful. Together, they had closed the chapter. But the connection, the bond, the quiet knowledge, the sense of belonging would remain forever. And in that soft, golden light, Ethan realized the truth. Healing doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes, it comes in quiet moments. In small, deliberate acts of trust. In the gentle presence of a tiny, patient friend. Ethan smiled, brushing a hand lightly over the puppy's fur. "Thank you," he whispered. The puppy leaned in slightly. A small, simple gesture. But for Ethan, it said everything. The story had found its home. The heart had found its peace. And together, they sat, silent, warm, whole.